All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're going to tackle a really bizarre, but honestly undeniable modern paradox all about freedom, self-improvement, and just utter exhaustion. Think about it. We live in a world that constantly tells us we can be absolutely anything we want, yet so many of us end up feeling like we aren't enough, like we're nothing. Today, we're going to unpack exactly why that is, and way more importantly, how we can actually break out of this vicious cycle. I mean, just look around, right? By pretty much any historical metric, we are freer than ever before. You can pull out your phone, order literally any food you're craving, we have unprecedented options for travel, and we can pursue virtually any career our heart's desire. But despite all this boundless freedom, depression and burnout are absolutely everywhere. The mental health crisis is only accelerating. So you really have to ask, why does ultimate freedom feel so exhausting? When was the last time you actually felt like you were enough, exactly as you are, without needing to optimize some part of your life?
So to get what's going on here, we kind of need to look at the cultural water we're swimming in. Researcher Tim Kasser has identified 4 driving principles of our modern economic culture: self-interest, the drive for financial success, consumerism, and relentless competition. And what his research clearly shows is that a heavy cultural emphasis on these 4 specific traits consistently leads to really poor mental health outcomes. We're steeped in this normalized myth that we're just isolated individuals striving for private goals. And the more we define ourselves by that metric, the more estranged we become from what actually keeps us healthy.
All right, Section 1, the modern burnout paradox. Let's explore the roots of our exhaustion. See, there's been this massive, profound shift in how society actually operates. The philosopher Michel Foucault famously wrote about the disciplinary society. This was the old school way of doing things. It was a society that controlled people by telling them what they should do, relying heavily on authoritarian surveillance and monitoring. But as philosopher Byung-Chul Han points out, we don't live in that world anymore. We live in an achievement society. Instead of telling you what you should do, this society tells you what you can do. You have unlimited potential. You can be anything. But here's the catch. Instead of freeing us, this shift to endless self-optimization has created a completely new kind of trap. Moving on to Section 2, your internal panopticon, the self as a labor camp. Later in his life, Foucault zeroed in on something he called technologies of the self. Basically, these are the voluntary rules and intentional actions we absolutely eagerly adopt to transform ourselves. You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? The strict 5 a.m. morning routines, the freezing cold plunges, the endless queue of productivity advice we consume. When we do these things, we feel this massive sense of freedom and pride. Like, we aren't being forced to wake up at 5 a.m. by some factory boss. We're doing it because we want to become our best selves. But the truth under the surface is much more complex. And that brings us to this wild concept called smart power. Byung-Chul Han argues that a society built on these technologies of the self is actually way more effective at extracting resources from you than any old authoritarian regime ever was. Why? Because smart power doesn't repress you, it motivates you. It compels you to willingly, even passionately, subject yourself to endless labor completely on your own accord, all under the very clever guise of self-optimization. We are literally exploiting ourselves just to increase our own marketability. So this effectively turns life into what we can call the endless self project. And man, the checklist is just exhausting. You have to stay in peak physical shape, you need to find a perfectly matched, attractive partner, you've got to hustle to make enough money, and to top it all off, things like your fitness and your hobbies aren't just for your enjoyment anymore. They're new economic resources to be marketed on social media and exploited. It's like we treat our bodies and our personalities like startup companies that require constant 24/7 self-production. Which leads to one of the most striking and frankly terrifying concepts we'll cover in this explainer, the internal panopticon. Originally, a panopticon was this prison design where inmates could be watched at literally any moment, so they ended up just policing themselves. Today, we carry that panopticon around inside our own heads. The digitalized, networked individual conducts perpetual auto-surveillance. We're using apps, sleep trackers, and health data to constantly monitor if we're optimizing ourselves enough. We have quite literally become both the guards and the prisoners in a labor camp of our own making. Which brings us to Section 3, the achievement trap, exhausting ourselves with ourselves. Stephen Reiner drops a pretty harsh reality check here. He points out that in our 21st century corporate culture, narcissism and sociopathy aren't necessarily treated as illnesses. They are highly successful strategies. Think about it for a second. We are culturally incentivized to be hyper-focused on ourselves, constantly monitoring our performance, endlessly promoting our self-image. You can never, ever let your guard down. And this constant obsessive self-reference just devolves into a never-ending rat race happening entirely within your own mind. So here's the absolutely crucial takeaway. We need to completely redefine burnout. Usually, we treat burnout like an annoyance or a personal failure in mastering ourselves. We think, oh, if I just optimized my routine better, I wouldn't be so burnt out. But Byung-Chul Han calls this eye tiredness. The ego simply grows exhausted and wears itself down through sheer recurrence and self-reference. Burnout and depression in this context aren't personal failings at all. They are the inevitable symptoms of a fractured soul completely exhausted by the achievement society. We are literally exhausting ourselves with ourselves. Okay, let's look at the fix. Section 4, the spontaneity cure, breaking the self-improvement loop. The psychologist and philosopher Erich Fromm had this masterful take on how negative freedom, which is just the absence of constraints, can actually leave us deeply alienated. Look at this quote. The sad fact of the matter is that we want that which we are supposed to want. It's so true, right? We think our endless self-improvement goals are our own, but a lot of the time we're just acting like automatons, playing out the script of the achievement society. We end up totally lacking any genuine connection or relatedness to the actual world around us. So, how on earth do we actually combat this burnout? Well, it all comes down to embracing spontaneity. We have got to radically reduce self-surveillance, the rigid optimization and constantly measuring every ounce of our potential. And instead, we need to start prioritizing activity. Spontaneity is the cure here because it forces us to do things purely for their own sake with an outward focus. By prioritizing the activity itself, we effectively starve that hyperactive ego of the measuring metrics it craves. Fromm actually argued that the ultimate cure is something you see in artists and children all the time. They play. They do things just for the sheer joy of the activity itself, not to put it on a resume or an Instagram story. By prioritizing activity over outcomes, you completely break the cycle of self-surveillance. You have to spend time with friends without some sneaky networking agenda. You have to gradually slow down. But maybe most importantly, you need to practice active listening. Listening forces you to close the spreadsheet of your life and open yourself up to the outer world. Doing these things naturally shuts down your internal panopticon and lets you enter a flow state, which is honestly the ultimate rebellion against the burnout society. The ultimate payoff for dropping this constant self-surveillance is pretty profound. Fromm notes that in the spontaneous realization of the self, man unites himself anew with the world. The hyperactive ego sees any disruption from the outside world as a threat to achieving its potential. But true vitality, feeling truly alive, only happens when we actually risk destabilizing our rigid journey towards self-perfection and let the chaotic, beautiful outer world back in. And honestly, I think philosopher Bertrand Russell gives us the absolute best, most succinct advice for walking this path. Let your interests be as wide as possible, and let your reactions to the things and persons that interest you be as far as possible friendly rather than hostile. So instead of looking inward with this hostile, critical eye demanding endless optimization, look outward with wide, friendly curiosity. Look, ultimately, the drive to be a better person isn't inherently a bad thing, not at all. But when it collapses into this hellish cycle of excessive self-reference and exhaustion, it is time to step off the wheel. So my question for you is, where can you drop the checklist and look outward today? Where can you engage in an activity just for the pure, unadulterated joy of it, completely unmeasured and unoptimized? Give it a try, because it might just be the most truly productive thing you do all year. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.